The stage lights of The View pulsed brighter than usual that morning. Producers buzzed nervously behind the cameras, adjusting mics and triple-checking segment notes. Something was off, or rather, someone was different. For the first time ever, 27-year-old White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt was about to sit across from Whoopi Goldberg and the rest of the panel. It wasn't just an interview, it was a powder keg. Karoline, cool-headed and prepared, adjusted the navy blue blazer she wore almost like armor. At her collar, a subtle silver charm glinted, a tiny reminder of her convictions, worn not to provoke but never hidden. She wasn't here to win applause. She was here to hold her ground. Backstage, a producer whispered, "This might get tense." Whoopi had already raised eyebrows in the pre-show meeting. "She wants to talk about media bias," she scoffed. "Let's see if she can handle honesty." Karoline reviewed her mental notes, ticking off key phrases, court rulings, data points. This wasn't her first fight, but it was her most televised. Live audience. Liberal stronghold. And Whoopi herself across the table. As the intro music faded and the applause cued in, Whoopi greeted the audience with her signature dry wit, only briefly acknowledging Karoline. "We've got someone from the White House today, and it's not the guy in charge." Laughter. Karoline smiled, but didn't flinch. "Thanks for having me. I'm here for clarity, not comedy." A pause. Even the crew blinked. The first few questions were predictable. Policy. Messaging. President Trump's recent comments. But then, the tone shifted. Whoopi leaned in. "You talk a lot about fairness in media, Karoline. But let's be real, aren't you just mad conservative voices don't get a free pass anymore?" Karoline folded her hands calmly. "I'm not asking for a pass. I'm asking for consistency. The truth shouldn't lean left or right." Whoopi smirked. "That's rich coming from a political spokesperson." And just like that, the tension crystallized. Viewers at home leaned closer. Social media began lighting up. This wasn't going to be a gentle exchange. Karoline's eyes didn't waver. "Then let's talk about bias and receipts. I brought both." Cut to commercial. The cameras flicked back on. The studio lights softened, but the air was thick. You could feel it, a storm building behind polite smiles. Whoopi adjusted her glasses, leaning forward. "All right, Karoline. Let's hear it. You say there's bias in the media. Show us." Karoline didn't miss a beat. She slid a thin folder onto the table. "Gladly. Here are transcripts from The View, CNN, MSNBC, dozens of mainstream outlets. In 1 year, over 150 negative headlines about conservatives aired with no retractions. But when false claims were made about progressives? Silence or soft correction?" Sunny Hostin scoffed. "So you're suggesting there's a coordinated attack?" Karoline kept her voice steady. "I'm saying selective outrage isn't journalism. It's activism in disguise." The audience stirred. Some clapped lightly. Others whispered. But Whoopi wasn't having it. "That's not proof." "That's spin," she said, tone sharper. "You want to talk about bias? Try being black in this country for 60 years. Karoline didn't flinch. "And I respect that experience. But bias isn't exclusive to race, it's systemic wherever narrative replaces truth. Conservatives, Christians, working-class voices, they're mocked, silenced, censored." Whoopi narrowed her eyes. "You're sitting here on national television claiming you're silenced?" Karoline smiled calmly. "And it's taken me a decade and a presidential administration to get here. That says something, doesn't it?" The crowd murmured again. One woman in the front row whispered, "She's got a point." Joy Behar jumped in, clearly agitated. "Why are conservatives always playing the victim?" Karoline's reply was razor-sharp, "We're not playing. We're responding. There's a difference." A beat passed. Whoopi leaned back slightly, visibly thrown off her rhythm. The moderator reached for her coffee mug. Karoline kept talking. When someone wears a cross and gets scolded but a celebrity wears political slogans on late night and gets applauded, that's not balance. That's branding bias. Sunny rolled her eyes. Oh please. But Karoline raised her voice just enough. It's why trust in media is at historic lows. People aren't stupid. They're tired of being told what to think, and punished for thinking differently. The tension in the room could be cut with a knife. Even the producers behind the glass looked stunned. Whoopi turned slightly, muttered under her breath, she came loaded. Karoline didn't react. Her eyes were locked forward, tone measured, message clear. For the first time in the segment, Whoopi had no comeback. Whoopi blinked twice. The pause stretched just long enough to be noticed. Her signature smirk, gone. For a moment, the queen of daytime clapbacks was quiet, and Karoline knew it. But Karoline didn't gloat. She leaned forward, voice calm but resonant. This isn't about me winning a debate. It's about millions of Americans who feel unheard on shows like this. Joy Behar tried to jump back in. Shows like this give you a platform. Karoline didn't raise her voice. After calling me a threat, a liar, and a fascist, on this very program, last year. I remember the transcript. The audience gasped. A few clapped. Others shifted uncomfortably. Whoopi finally spoke again, this time slower. You act like words don't have context. And yet when they hurt people like me, they're dismissed as jokes. Satire, entertainment, Karoline replied, her eyes steady. But let someone on my side speak plainly, and it's called hate speech. Sunny Hostin folded her arms. So what do you want? Apology? Censorship? I want accountability, Karoline answered, without hesitation. And a media that holds itself to the same standard it demands from others. The energy in the studio shifted. It was no longer just a political back and forth. It was personal, raw, real. Whoopi leaned in again, finally regaining some footing. Okay, but what about empathy? For people who've been silenced, systemically, not just felt left out, because their talking points weren't clapped for? Karoline's answer landed heavy. Empathy is not a one-way street. You don't get to demand compassion for your pain and mock others for theirs. A brief silence followed. Someone in the audience muttered, "Damn." The camera cut to Whoopi, blinking slowly, trying to find a sharp retort, but nothing came. Instead, she glanced at the producer's booth, clearly signaling to speed up the next segment. But Karoline wasn't finished. I didn't come here for airtime, she added. I came because people back home begged me to stop pretending the media is neutral. And you've proven their point, live. The timer flashed red. They had 15 seconds left. Joy muttered, "Okay, we'll be back." But as the music rolled and the screen faded to commercial, viewers at home had already started clipping the moment. Karoline Leavitt. On The View. Whoopi speechless. It was already trending. By the time the cameras cut to commercial, producers were already panicking behind the scenes. Phones buzzed. Interns scrambled. Clips from the segment were leaking onto social media faster than they could respond. On X, the hashtag Whoopi went silent began climbing. Within 20 minutes, it was trending top 3 nationwide. One clip, Karoline calmly saying empathy is not a one-way street, had already hit 500,000 views. And the day wasn't even half over. Backstage, Whoopi stormed past the curtain, muttering, "I've sat across from senators, celebrities, even Trump's lawyers," but she didn't finish the sentence. Karoline stayed seated in her guest chair for a moment, checking her phone. Dozens of messages were coming in. A few from White House aides. Several from conservative commentators. But most were from ordinary viewers. I've never seen anyone hold their own on that show like that. Thank you for speaking for people like me. You stayed calm while they squirmed. One message stood out. It was from President Trump himself. Well done. That was a masterclass. Let's amplify this. Karoline smirked slightly, but she knew this wasn't over. Back on set, the crew prepped for the next guest. But the energy was fractured. Joy was flustered, flipping through cue cards out of order. Sunny sat with arms crossed, lips tight. Whoopi stayed standing, pacing slowly. They'd expected a typical sparring session, a punching bag in a blazer. Instead, they got a scalpel. Meanwhile, on social media, liberal voices were divided. Some tried damage control. She played the victim well, that's what they do. Don't give her credit. She's still part of the machine. But others admitted the obvious. She was calm, factual, they weren't ready. You might not like her, but she made points no one touched. Conservative influencers flooded timelines. Karoline just did what half of DC can't, confront media power on its own turf. Even center-left outlets took notice. A headline on Axios read, "Leavitt breaks the echo chamber, the View moment goes nuclear." Karoline's comms team had already clipped the key segment and drafted a statement. She'd appear later that day on Fox, then Newsmax. But before any of that, she sat alone in the green room, quiet, focused. She wasn't celebrating. She was calculating. Because what happened today was just the first move. By early afternoon, the mainstream media couldn't ignore it anymore. CNN aired a short segment calling Karoline's appearance aggressive and disruptive. MSNBC brought on a media analyst who claimed she ambushed the View with coordinated talking points. But Karoline didn't need to say a word. The footage spoke for itself, her calm tone, the sharp facts, Whoopi's silence. The people watching had already made up their minds. Meanwhile, at the View's headquarters, producers debated whether to release an edited version of the segment online. "We need to cut the awkward pause," one of them said. "It makes Whoopi look rattled." But another producer shook her head. "Too late. It's everywhere." Even Good Morning Britain ran the clip. Back at Karoline's hotel suite, her team was working at lightning speed. Her press secretary had arranged back-to-back interviews for the next 24 hours. A conservative podcast with 1.2 million subscribers. A panel on Newsmax. A live stream event hosted by a faith-based nonprofit. Karoline reviewed every appearance offer, crossing off anything weak. "We don't just ride the wave," she said, eyes sharp. "We steer it." That night, on Fox News primetime, she made her first post-View appearance. The host smiled wide. "Karoline Leavitt, you just walked into enemy territory, and walked out untouched. How did that feel?" Karoline leaned into the mic. It wasn't about feeling anything. It was about saying what no one else in that chair ever dares to say. The media doesn't ask questions, it delivers sermons. "I disrupted their narrative," the host laughed. "You did more than that. You rewrote it." The clip from that interview went viral too, another 2 million views in one night. Across the country, local news shows and AM radio stations started covering it. Pastors preached about it on Sunday. College students referenced it in debates. Even apolitical voters, who didn't know who Karoline Leavitt was on Monday, suddenly had an opinion by Thursday. But with the spotlight came resistance. The View's social media page posted a passive-aggressive quote. "Sometimes silence is dignity, not defeat." Karoline reposted it with a caption. "Sometimes silence is proof you ran out of excuses." The comments section exploded. Meanwhile, Whoopi's team quietly cancelled her appearance at an upcoming media symposium. Rumors swirled that her producers were reassessing risk exposure. Karoline had not only pierced the echo chamber, she shattered its windows. And she was just getting started. Inside ABC's Media Strategy War Room, executives gathered in a closed-door session. The topic? Not a breaking scandal, not a lawsuit, but Karoline Leavitt. "She didn't just dominate the segment," said one senior producer. "She exposed a vulnerability." And now everyone's watching for the next slip. A digital analyst pulled up a real-time dashboard. She's been mentioned over 12,000 times in the last 2 hours, across platforms. That's more than any of The View's hosts combined, in a week. The room was tense. Meanwhile, Karoline walked into a conservative roundtable event in D.C., greeted by cheers. Journalists surrounded her. Her phone buzzed with fresh invites: Harvard's Republican Club, Turning Point USA, even international outlets. But Karoline wasn't interested in just praise. She gathered her communications team later that night. "I want the next step mapped by tomorrow. We have to turn this momentum into something structural. A bigger story. A new campaign. Ideas?" One aide spoke up: "What if we launch a video series? Behind-the-scenes breakdowns. Not just politics, strategy, messaging, media accountability." Karoline nodded slowly. "That's interesting. Make politics digestible. Turn voters into thinkers." Another aide offered, also. "What if you challenge Whoopi directly? On camera. One-on-one. Make the offer public." Silence. Then Karoline smiled. "Too aggressive," she said, but the glint in her eye said otherwise. "Let them stew a bit longer. The public's watching. Let's keep their silence working against them." Over the weekend, Karoline released a short video titled, "When the Bias Breaks." It was under 2 minutes. No flashy edits. Just her, speaking directly to camera. What happened on that stage wasn't just television drama, it was a moment. One that revealed something real, that for years, conservative voices have been ridiculed instead of reasoned with. But that era is ending. The video exploded. 5 million views in 24 hours. Tens of thousands of shares. In private group chats among mainstream pundits, panic stirred. "She's framing herself as a freedom fighter," one anchor typed. Another replied, "And worse, it's working." Meanwhile, Whoopi remained silent. No statements. No follow-ups. No public apology. Just absence, and absence, in this media war, was blood in the water. Karoline's name was now echoing in unexpected places: liberal think tanks, college lecture halls, media ethics forums. She'd done more than break the moment. She'd started to bend the narrative. And she wasn't planning to stop. By Monday morning, The View's rating saw an uncharacteristic spike, but the hosts weren't celebrating. The numbers weren't from loyal viewers. They were from curious Americans replaying the now infamous silence, over and over. Whoopi Goldberg arrived at the studio unusually early. Her assistant handed her a list of public statements drafted by the network's PR team. She tossed them aside. "I don't need a statement," she muttered. "I need a redo." But there was no redo. Only the echo of Karoline's words, dissected, memed, and now etched into political culture. In New Hampshire, Karoline Leavitt's hometown, local coffee shops played the clip like a proud anthem. College students debated it in civic classrooms. Grandmothers nodded in approval in church foyers. She had become more than a spokesperson. She was a cultural flashpoint. And yet, Karoline stayed grounded. That afternoon, she met privately with a coalition of young conservative women leaders. The room was small, no cameras, no press, but the conversation was electric. "You walked into one of the most liberal shows in America," said a woman from Arizona, "and didn't blink." Karoline replied with measured calm, "Because I wasn't walking into a trap. I was walking into an opportunity. They assumed I'd play defense. I didn't." She emphasized discipline, not emotion. "People think going viral is luck. But it's architecture. You prepare your message. You predict their spin. You wait for the moment, and then you seize it." Later that night, another surprise: a clip surfaced of Whoopi speaking at a private donor dinner days earlier. A shaky phone recording caught her saying, "We brought her on for ratings, not for a lecture. We underestimated how polished those little MAGA kids are now." The backlash was immediate. Even moderate journalists criticized her tone. One columnist wrote, Dismissing intelligence because it comes from the other side isn't journalism, it's cowardice. Karoline's team saw the clip. Her response? Nothing. No statement. No tweet. Just silence, the very tool Whoopi failed to use with power. And in that silence, the narrative shifted again. The right saw validation. The left felt exposed. And the media? They began asking a question they rarely asked about conservatives. What if she's right? Karoline knew the next move wasn't about her. It was about what came next, for others like her. So she picked up her phone, dialed a number, and said, "Let's start a platform. Not just for me. For all of us." Karoline Leavitt didn't want this to be just a headline moment. She saw the opportunity for something longer lasting, a media counterforce. In a small office overlooking D.C., she sat with 2 trusted advisors and a branding strategist. The concept was bold, a new digital platform designed to train, elevate, and amplify young conservative voices, especially those often silenced or mocked in legacy media spaces. They called it Clarity, not a network, not a show, a movement. Every time the media calls us names, Karoline said, we gain recruits. But they need tools, framing, messaging, composure. What good is fire if you don't know where to aim it? The strategist smiled. We give them the megaphone they were denied. Karoline nodded. And we start with media literacy. Teach them how to break through narrative filters. That week, Clarity launched its beta page. It offered free tutorials on how to respond under pressure on live TV, how to recognize manipulative framing, how to anchor your response in constitutional language without sounding robotic. The initial email list? 10,000 signups in the first 48 hours. But success sparked resistance again. The View's executive producer tweeted a cryptic message. New grifters, same old script. Karoline didn't respond. But Clarity's official account posted, if training conservatives to speak clearly is grifting, then prepare for bankruptcy. The post exploded. Suddenly, mainstream outlets scrambled to cover this new angle. Not just Karoline on The View, but Karoline builds a platform to counter legacy media bias. At CNN, an op-ed called it dangerous and calculated. At Fox, it was called genius and overdue. The New York Times begrudgingly referred to Karoline as a communications tactician with disturbing efficacy. The pressure grew, but so did the reach. Meanwhile, Whoopi Goldberg remained off-air for days. Officially, it was a personal leave. Unofficially, her producers were fending off questions from Disney brass asking how a 26-year-old woman had completely redirected public perception of their show. Back at Clarity's HQ, Karoline held a whiteboard marker and stood before a new plan. This isn't about just fighting back, she said. It's about reclaiming the microphone. Her team nodded. And for the first time in years, conservative youth didn't just feel seen, they felt heard. Days after Clarity's launch, national attention intensified. While legacy networks tried to shift the spotlight, the internet wasn't letting go. Young conservatives were reposting Karoline's segment, not as a moment of media clash, but as a roadmap. TikTok creators stitched her appearance with captions like, "This is how you stay calm when they try to mock you." Karoline didn't just survive The View, she rewrote the rules. Karoline sat in a quiet recording booth, preparing for the first episode of Clarity's flagship podcast, Counterline. No flashy intro, just her voice. They told us we didn't belong. That our views were backward, intolerant, or just unworthy. But what they didn't expect was that we'd learn to speak better than them. This isn't a revolution of rage. It's one of reason. Welcome to Clarity. Within 48 hours, the episode hit number 3 on the Apple Podcasts political chart, outranking most mainstream outlets. But that wasn't the turning point. It came during an unexpected moment at Georgetown University. Karoline had been invited to speak at a panel on media polarization. Sitting across from her on stage, a Pulitzer-winning liberal columnist, a seasoned cable news anchor. And surprisingly, a last-minute guest, Whoopi Goldberg herself. The room buzzed with tension. Karoline stood to speak first. Calm. Controlled. We don't need echo chambers. We need open rooms, even when the walls shake. I came today to speak, not to fight. Gasps rippled when Whoopi stood next. She looked at Karoline, held the mic, and said, I disagreed with everything you said on my show, but I'll say this. You came prepared, you didn't flinch, and you proved something. That even if we hate the message, we should never fear the messenger. The room fell silent. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even warmth. But it was acknowledgement, and in this landscape, that was everything. Later, backstage, Whoopi approached Karoline. I still think you're wrong on almost everything, she said with a half-smile. Karoline nodded. Good, then we should talk more. They shook hands. Photographers captured it. The image went viral, two women from opposing worlds, not hugging, not smiling, but meeting. That photo became a new symbol, not of agreement, but of consequence. 3 weeks after her headline clash with Whoopi Goldberg, Karoline Leavitt walked the halls of Capitol Hill, not as a guest, not as a talking point, but as a sought-after voice. Lawmakers from both sides, grudgingly or eagerly, now knew her name. Some praised her as a rising star of the right. Others whispered warnings in backrooms, don't underestimate her composure. She's dangerous because she doesn't yell. But Karoline wasn't here for praise or panic. She was here with a binder. Inside, a drafted bill titled the Fair Access to Media Act, a proposal requiring public broadcasters to transparently report guest booking decisions and ideological representation. Symbolic? Maybe. But it forced the conversation. Behind closed doors, one senator asked her, do you really think a media law like this has a chance? Karoline smiled. I didn't think a 10-minute exchange would upend the most-watched daytime show in America. But here we are. Meanwhile, Clarity had surpassed 500,000 users. Students used its content in debate prep. Faith-based organizations requested licensing. Even international outlets reached out to translate its model. And Karoline? She wasn't chasing the next viral moment. She was building infrastructure, training dozens of young voices to hold the line where others backed down. One afternoon, she stood before a group of new recruits, all in their early 20s, many nervous but burning with purpose. She raised her phone and played a 7-second clip. Whoopi, you think that little cross gives you authority? Karoline, no. But the Constitution does. She paused the video. Everyone wants to talk about that clip, she said. But what matters isn't the moment, it's the preparation before it, and the discipline after. A hand rose in the back. So what now? Karoline looked out the window of the training room, the Capitol dome visible in the distance. Now, she said. Now we go from responding to defining. From outrage to outline. From being silenced to setting the tone. She glanced at the framed photo on the wall, her and Whoopi, standing stiffly, side by side. And underneath, a small plaque, Truth doesn't shout. It stands. What started as a clash on daytime TV became something much louder than applause, it became a shift. Karoline Leavitt didn't just go head-to-head with Whoopi Goldberg. She faced the weight of media bias, stood firm, and spoke for every voice that's been told to sit down, be quiet, or fall in line. When Whoopi had no words, the silence said everything. But Karoline didn't stop at a viral moment, she built a movement. She launched a platform, trained young voices, and showed an entire generation that conviction, not volume, is what echoes. This wasn't just about a necklace, a debate, or a clapback. It was about reminding America that faith, freedom, and truth don't need permission to speak. And now, that spark has caught fire. The microphone isn't just back in our hands, it's finally being used for something real.